everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for Strategy Sunday from More Than a Protest. My name is Julasha Simpson, and I will be your moderator today. I'm actually the Public Relations Director for More Than a Protest. I want to start off by just thanking our magnificent panelists for joining us to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure all of your hearts as well. We're going to talk about the education of our children. In such a weird climate that we're going through today, it's really important for us to make sure we have a really great strategy to make sure our kids are still getting the proper education from home or in the classroom. So I want to start off by introducing our panelists. If Dr. Bryan can start off by introducing himself, that would be great.
Peace, family, peace and blessings. My name is Dr. Dwayne Bryan. I'm originally from Oak City, North Carolina. I'm the founder of Bryan Consulting Company, and I'm a nationally certified school psychologist. I'm also an author of 4 children's books and, a self-help and motivational book entitled Healing Over Time, Accept, Identify, and Release. Proud to say that I'm a 2-time graduate from 2 of the best HBCUs on the planet, Winston-Salem State University and Howard University. Howard is where, I completed my doctoral level training in human development and psychoeducational studies. I am blessed to gain experience in the field of psychology by working with American Psychological Association, the National Association of School Psychologists, Educational Assessment Service. And I'm also extremely proud to say that I'm an advocate for, our Black and brown communities, but specifically to change the narrative of Black boys in the educational system. Over the past 2 to 3 years, I've created content and products that allow children from our communities to see themselves in the educational process, because seeing is believing. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryan. And Ms. Angelle, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Natalie Angelle. I am from New Orleans, Louisiana, but I live in Opelousas, Louisiana. I have a degree in education. My undergrad comes from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and my master's in curriculum and instruction comes from American College of Education. Currently, I am going into my 17th year of teaching, 4th year of assistant principal, 17th year in education. And I am also a part of the Southwest Louisiana chapter of Jack and Jill. Thank you all for having me today.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you for joining us. And Mr. Whalen?
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Whalen, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I'm the assistant principal of a school called Vinci Rise High School. We're a school devoted to meeting the needs of youth in foster care, youth who struggle with housing instability, and then youth who are also in and on probation. What we find is that that's a cycle often and always disproportionately impacting our Black and brown youth. But we see that those systems all interact with one another. I graduated from Grinnell College in Iowa and then got my master's in educational leadership at LMU in Los Angeles. But just really excited to be here and kind of talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart every day, and just to be amongst such incredible professionals who also do this work every day is just a really privilege, and I'm excited to jump in.
We're super excited to jump in with you too. And Ms. Salina, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Yasmin Salina, co-founder of the Hustlers Guild. Today is our 3-year anniversary. Woo woo. We focus on the intersection of hip hop and STEM and arts, helping kids in inner cities articulate that they are a part of the STEM and arts community by exposing them to more careers within their own interests, and then educating them on how to articulate and empower them by working with different corporations and educational institutions to help get them pipeline opportunities. And I went to Alabama State University.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, I want to introduce Ms. Ward.
Hi everyone, my name is Apollonia Ward. I'm the COO of Naturally Vera. It's a pH balanced designer hair care product line for all hair types that my sister and I created. Additionally, I work in the field of government contracting, but I believe I was invited because I homeschool my children. I went to Virginia Tech for mechanical engineering.
Thank you so much for being with us. Like I said, we have an amazing panel of people here to talk about a topic that is so, so important to the future of our community. So today, the things that we want to break down are just the educational inequalities that our children sometimes face, how we can actually come up with some strategies to help navigate the system, especially when we really don't know what's going on with a lot of these schools right now, and just also helping to give parents tools for children to kind of navigate this socially, educationally, and mentally. And so I want to kind of talk about how we can fill in some gaps, or I want to start off by talking about filling in gaps during virtual learning, because I think that that's a really quick way for kids to kind of get forgotten about. So if you could answer the question of what to look for and how to help your child kind of navigate learning virtually, that would be extremely helpful. Dr. Bryan?
Yes. So now you're speaking kind of in my area. You know, my research is in social media and digital technology as it comes to student engagement, academic outcomes. So now everything is virtual, everything is tech, everything is Google Classroom, Zoom, and all the get-ups, right? So when it comes to students, you have to understand that these students are in the technology age. They understand how to use a cell phone, a laptop, or even an iPad better than their parents. So in a lot of cases, you have, as parents, I recommend you to educate yourself on what are the latest technology applications that my child is using. You know, in the schools, how are, you know, my teachers communicating with me? Some schools, they use Power Schools. Some schools use, you know, just a full Google system. But also, I want to stress the fact of parents really understanding how to actually navigate those systems. So with Google Classroom, you have a platform that, you know, allows teachers and educators alike to connect a lot of different tools, a lot of different resources in order to, you know, disseminate information. So one tip that I would give is create you a Google account. I mean, most people have a Google account in 2020, but create you a Google account. Actually take time to go through each function to figure out, how do I use Google Docs? How do I use, well, Google Drive for that matter? Like, how do I store all my information? Also look at Google Forms. You know, how can I create a mini survey? How can I, you know, get this information out to multiple people so that I can understand how my child is being educated in this virtual, you know, kind of climate right now. So the first part is truly understanding. And I want to give everybody else a chance to speak on it. But for me, in my role in the schools as a school psychologist, a lot of the times I see the biggest hurdle that parents face is their lack of understanding of how to utilize a technology application.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else want to chime in? Ms. Angelle?
Yes, I definitely agree with him. We, in the district where I work, there's been a lot of different schools having like virtual meet and greets. For example, I just had one for my children the other day, and the way it was conducted was the school sent out the link and parents were able to actually join through Google Meet, because in my district we're using the G Suite. So it allowed parents to explore and to log on to see what the platform looked like. But I definitely agree, the parents have to definitely explore, because yes, the kids are very knowledgeable in using technology these days. So, you know, I think that the kids will do just fine. I think it probably be more so of the parents who are not really tech savvy, who may have, you know, a little difficulty, but it's not anything that they can't learn or get through, of course.
Can I add to that? Okay, so I had wrote a list down while everyone was talking because this is something that we've been focusing on when the pandemic started. For corporations, I want corporations to understand that they play a role into this virtual learning by understanding, one, the tech divide. And that's what any social economic class to understand, that everyone doesn't have a laptop for every child that's in their household. They don't have headphones for everyone that's there. And some of them don't even have the Wi-Fi bandwidth to teach their students there. So we need to first acknowledge that there is a tech divide that we thought that started before the pandemic. It already hit harder while we're in the pandemic right now. The next thing that we need to understand is that how do we then get the parents up to speed with the actual learning environment? Some parents, whether they're single parents or have multiple, if there's multiple parents in the household, they have 3 or 4 kids and classes going on at the same time, right? So we got to really get to the point of understanding that, and then letting children know that it's okay. They're probably feeling overwhelmed. I'm on Zoom calls all day and I'd be annoyed. So I can imagine what it's like to actually be in grade school. You have to literally sit through that. And we also want educators to like give them a break, but they have to find ways to like enhance their curriculum now that they're moving something that's typically in person to the virtual space. So finding ways to incorporate and enhancing their visual learning with their students. And it's something that is going to take time. This is all new territory for everyone, but just to see what works and what does not work. But the main thing for students that we focus on servicing is that there is a huge tech divide and they're way behind. And even if they are tech savvy, we're still trying to teach them basic skills that other communities are running laps around us. So we need to be very conscious of that and understanding of who we're dealing with and how can we get that information to them in this short amount of time that others are.
To kind of piggyback on that, do you have any suggestions on how we can close that technology gap? Because I think that that is very important, like access to resources. Do you have any suggestions on how we can, you know?
Of course. So I believe in right now, and one of my colleagues said this before, is put the action behind the caption. So right now it's cool and trendy to support Black people just because of everything that's going on in the country, right? But hold those people accountable. So do the follow-ups, do the letters, people that are in a position of leadership and have influence, whether it's in your organization or within the community, ask for those meetings and say, hey, I know that you made a statement on such and such date. I'm following up to see what initiatives that you're putting in place and or what organizations are you supporting, because right now in my organization we have 93% of our students are without technology for all students within the household, and they kind of figure out what that timeline is and who they're supporting. If they give you a list of organizations, then team up with those organizations. If they don't, ask how can you help push those initiatives or set something in stone where you're building something up from conception to completion with these people who are putting out these statements or posting a Black color on there, and whatever that they're doing that they're saying to support. You have to really hold them accountable. And I feel like as educators, as parents, as community leaders, we are the people that's supposed to question them. And to me, a post is never enough. So if this is the time right now, like strike the iron while it's hot and hold those people accountable.
I really love all of these ideas. I mean, the fact that a lot of parents aren't familiar with technology, the fact that there's not the technology in the home, like these are all things that we really need to highlight. But calling people to action, calling companies and organizations that are saying that they can support our community, calling them to action, I think that that's really important. And so when we're talking about like access, how we're getting our children access to this technology, it's like, okay, now we have access, but my kid is falling behind. How are we helping to pick up those kids that are falling behind? Mr. Whalen, I feel like you can help us like.
Yeah, I really loved hearing what my colleagues had to say as well. I think just to add on to the point about the digital divide, we have to understand the nuances within the digital divide as well. I think a lot of parents can be disillusioned by our youth having cell phones, right? And like they've had a cell phone since they were a little kid, or they've had a game box system since they were a little kid, but we're not understanding that a lot of the things that have not traditionally been afforded to our communities, like computers or MacBooks, are places where even youth now are really often scared of. I find a lot of my students who are very quick to be able to do anything on their cell phone, but are very, very uncomfortable with the idea of a computer. And a lot of that has to just do with their history in school and also about the kind of access that they've had. And so I think that's a big piece. I think in terms of getting our kids invested and open to being more able and willing to grow in that area is that parents have to do that work too. So it's like, you know, teach me how to do this. What did you learn today? Let me sit with you next to you in class. Like, what does that look like? I think something that we often are struggling with in this situation is that the binary and the boundaries between what is at home and what is in school have now been broken down. And if we don't change the home to match what needs to happen in a school environment, then students are going to have a challenge to come across. I think that also brings up like equity, and a family who might have the opportunity to have an office in their house, right? That student can go in that quiet space, be on their own, versus a kid who's in foster care who has 7 kids in the household, all of which are doing online schooling but not being monitored in any way. And I think so often we have to think about those things as well. And I'd say this is more of like a nuanced point that's less to do with technology, more just to do with schooling in a home in general. You got to think about like what traditions, routines, allowed your student to learn in a school that may not exist in the home in the same way. And so I think about just like the tradition of like getting up and getting ready, the tradition of like what does it mean to turn on, right? Like I'm turning on when I walk into the school building. I think a lot of times that's just missed now because we're all in front of our computer screens, and parents are overwhelmed with their jobs, and so may not have the time and energy or access to support their children in that way as well. And so a lot of my parents who are struggling, or foster parents who are struggling, I'm always talking to them about routines. Recreating that routine and also being able to learn alongside your youth so that they're not feeling like they're doing it on their own can be a huge part of the puzzle that can allow us to at least begin to break down some of those divides.
Thank you so much for that input. And so when we're talking about like breaking down that fourth wall of education, like for a lot of parents, this is very, very new. Like you might know your kid is struggling in math, but you don't necessarily know that it's geometry specifically that your child is struggling with. So being able to like recognize exactly what issues your child might be having in school, it's a lot more apparent when you're sitting next to them all day, every day. And that's why I think Ms. Ward might have good input into how we can actually determine areas that our child might be needing help in that we may not know if, by just like looking at the school books. What are your thoughts?
So for me, coming from both sides, my children have actually attended school before, so I've been on that side and then transitioning into homeschool. And I think that one of the major things that we have to do as parents is really have involvement in what's going on, like everyone else has said. And my personal idea of what school should be like is the school or the teacher introduces a topic, but it has to be something that we follow on at home. So that way we always know where our children are in school, and it's not something that we find out with the interim or the report card when it's too late, but we're always immersed in what they have going on at school. And we also have more time to give our input on things that aren't working well for the way that our children learn. And we don't really get that input. And then you get companies that can come in and say, oh, I'm going to give you this amount of money, do core math. And now all the parents are going haywire. When if we were more involved, we could have stopped that before it became a huge thing that just was mandated and couldn't do anything about it until it was too late and our children were performing poorly. One of the things that has been beneficial to me is looking for certain cues in small children to know when to introduce things. So for example, a lot of times I'll get a question or in a request for assistance about a child not reading well. And the first thing I ask is, can they write? And it's like, well, not really. And I'm like, well, they don't have any business reading if they don't know how to write. Or watching for cues when your child is very orderly. That's the perfect time to introduce math. And just knowing what those things are, and just knowing that you know your child better than anybody else, and to be confident in knowing your child, and when they're struggling or when they're really good at something, just kind of just pushing things in that area and not really focusing on the other things because they might not be so important at that moment. And then once they have gained a really strong foundation and strength in one subject, then you start focusing on the other one because you know they won't lose the topic that they're good at. So I found some really creative ways. I think the closest thing to the way that I teach would be Montessori, but it's probably more radical than that.
I'd love to add a little bit to Ms. Ward's point if possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I really love the idea of like learning your child as a student, right? I think that's something that we haven't had to do. Many of us haven't had to do. Some have had to do it on various levels. But I think about, even in my history in the classroom as an educator, I always knew the kids in my English class that I would need to go back to reiterate the point, and to differentiate and to support and to walk them through line by line so they had comprehension. But if a parent is not able, because of inequality or whatever that might be, to be as involved as some parents who might have more affluence or might have more time, right? Like they may not know their child's nuances, so they could get frustrated or turn off and not realize, like, your child has gotten 30 more minutes of one-on-one instruction than any other student in the school, but you haven't gotten a chance to consult with your teacher on what that looks like for them. And so I think about, as an educator, no matter how deeply involved my educators at my school are into the homes of the children and supporting, they're still at this point long distance consultants, right? Like, I can tell you what this looks like after the lesson is over. I can walk you through as a parent how to support your child. But for your kid, the 1 hour Zoom session was not enough in person, and it's not going to be enough at home. And so we have to provide those skills to parents so that they can say, okay, let's go ahead and sit down and go over what I just saw you guys go through. I think that's a huge responsibility on everyone, right? It's not just educators, but it's also parents.
I wanted to.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to add a little bit more to that. Like, I know for me, the thing that has actually made homeschooling successful to me is that, you know, we as Black people are very tribal. And, you know, we are in a really unique situation where we're going to get to decide what the new normal is actually going to look like. And we're going to need to start leaning on each other. And by having, you know, some people may call it like co-ops or things like that, but having a tribe of people that you can depend on to work together to make sure that your child succeeds, even in areas where you don't have strengths. You know, my kids, I know they don't want to hear everything from me. So I try to get them to go around to different people to learn what those people are good at, because that's their thing. That's what they're good at. And I don't know if my kids are interested in it yet. So that is how I introduce other things. So, you know, this is going to force us to be more tribal, which we naturally are anyway. And I think that that's going to be something that makes it more beneficial to our children being home and learning virtually, by being able to lean on other people, because teachers cannot do it alone. They need a tribe of parents backing the students. And now that the parents are seeing, like, look, this teacher is trying to get 30, 45 kids to learn this one thing, they need our support. And now being in that teacher's shoes at home is going to be like, look, I've got to get support from somewhere. And we're going to start getting more tribal. It's not going to be an overnight thing, but it's something that's going to have to happen because everyone is being affected by this. So I think, you know, we're going in a positive direction.
And kids that get left behind generally are just trying to figure it out on their own. And so one of the things that I really wanted to talk about and highlight for parents, just to kind of teach them ways to help their kids, is talk about learning styles and really understanding what your child's learning style is. Some kids can hear something once, catch on to it, but most kids can't. And like with the Zoom style learning approach, you're not necessarily getting that hands-on approach. And so for a lot of kids, not having that face-to-face hands-on approach is what's going to hinder them. So how do you think parents can get more involved with these lesson plans so that they can understand whether or not their child is a visual learner, an audible learner, or a more kinetic learner?
Yeah, I would like to answer that one. For me, I want to preface this answer with speaking to the system, because I'm a school psychologist, so I'm a representative of the system. And I always recommend parents to, you know, connect with your school psychologist, connect with the person who is going to be called upon to do an evaluation if the teacher or some educator feels as if your child is having some learning difficulties. So I want to speak to this piece, because school psychologists, the work that we do, we ensure the protection and educational rights, opportunity, and well-being of the student. So it's not just one aspect that we look at the full picture, and we work on data points. So as a parent, trying to figure out how can you assess different learning styles, you know, you can get a non-standardized assessment. You can go on educationplanner.org, and you can do an informal standardized learning style quiz that can give you an idea of how your child learns. And that's from a data perspective. Also, you don't have to understand, you know, the testing or evaluation side, because you're going to work with a qualified professional to understand that. But also don't underestimate your knowledge of your child. Look at, how they do chores. Look at how they respond to you verbally. Pay attention to the things that they get excited about. These things are all indicators that I use in my own personal evaluations to provide context to learning disabilities. So in general, the most common supplemental resources that you can use are flashcards, auditory clips, online programs, and YouTube has been a complete game changer when it comes to education and learning. Kids love YouTube. I have a niece who's barely 1. She's like 10 months, and she's on YouTube looking at videos, moving and shaking. So these kids, not in today's time with social media and everything being more visual, seeing and having tutorials and steps in front of them, the combination of all that really, really helps drive the acquisition of knowledge.
Wow, that was super helpful. So I never even thought about connecting with school psychologists as a way to kind of reach your children. Just to kind of recap what we went through, because I feel like there's a lot of information that you guys just gave us. Everybody's dropping gems. One of the biggest things that we want to do is look for specific cues in your children to figure out where they might need help. We want to have a communal village type approach to educating our children, so it's not just coming from one place. Working with school professionals like school psychologists, that's a huge one, to really understand how to properly educate your child, or to just chime in with someone who's a professional at it, because let's be honest, most of the parents that have children that are in school right now do something completely outside of the scope of education. So I think that that's wonderful. As far as methods to proactively manage your child's learning, how would you suggest parents work with their children outside of school alone to help educate them?
Well, what I think one thing is to kind of go back to the tribal support. There's many Facebook groups out there that have been created to help parents to support one another, because we all know that we're in this new era of time. So I've joined groups myself, of course, and I know of several other groups being created on Facebook. So if any parent is out there and you're not part of that Facebook support group, I highly suggest that you join, because there's a lot of tips, there's a lot of suggestions, there's a lot of people offering services for people who may work or what have you. So they're forming pods, and they're forming the tribal groups to help one another. So I think if you all parents are out there, lean on those Facebook support groups as well, because that can be a very helpful resource for you all. So I just wanted to kind of go back over that, but some methods to keep your kids actively engaged. I mean, when you're at home and your child is learning virtually from home, I think you want to try to the best of your ability, number one, to create a consistent environment. Try to create an environment that's conducive to learning. Have that child in a particular area within the house that is quiet, if possible, and off to itself, so your child can have that space. You want to have a routine. The child should wake up not right when school is about to start virtually, but get them on a routine where they wake up at a certain time, so that way they can have their breakfast, they can prepare, put on their clothes or what have you. So you definitely want them to get ready as if they were going to school. You want to have check-ins with those kids as well. Ask them how their day was, look over their assignment, see what it is that you can help with. And once again, if you are not that good at a particular subject, then you want to rely on your your peers, your colleagues, your family, whoever it is who can offer support.
Perfect. So I think that all three of those points, like creating a specific learning environment, starting a real routine for your kids, and also checking in with them on a regular basis is a really good way to get a handle and get them used to this process as well. One thing that I think a lot of people are worried about is whether or not their kid is getting enough attention from their teacher. So I think that always starts off with the parent having a good relationship with the teacher. And so I was just wondering, since there's so many educators in this group, what's the best way for a parent to communicate with a teacher, an administrator about their child's education?
For me, I think it's highly important to just have an open line of communication, email, call, physically, well, post-COVID, physically showing up to the classroom, being active. A lot of times when parents show a vested interest in their child's educational process, teachers don't mind reaching back out. School psychologists don't mind sending emails, scheduling meetings. It's all about how the tone that you set. Because if you set a tone to where I'm not going to allow my child to slip through the cracks, I'm not going to allow my child to receive less than what he or she may need from you as an educator, then you typically get that energy back. But in most common times, we respond to emails. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we're on the computer all day. Send an email, schedule a Zoom meeting. Just make it known that you want that information, because when you do that, we're required to give you that.
I think another point to add to that, which often creates that gap, is really having parents know the expectation that's being stated by the school. I think that's one of the biggest discrepancies we found, is that we would do a lot of orientations with parents and with students, but if parents didn't have the time to necessarily do that, or to look at the emails or the kind of like blog posts, they didn't really know the expectation. So for a lot of students, they'd be like, oh, I don't have class today. Or I don't, that teachers, they don't work after 2. But the whole time the teachers are working from 8 a.m. until 5, on Zoom with students. But then it's the students who have kind of that more structure in the home who are on that Zoom the entire time, which feeds into the inequity in general. So I think if the parent knows the resources that are available and how long really those teachers are working and how much time is flexible time, because a lot of the teachers, I haven't talked to any folks in schools right now where they don't have like one-on-one check-in blocks, where the teachers like either use Calendly or another system where all students who need help and assistance are kind of like scheduling out time. And so, but a lot of parents just don't know that. And so the student is able to say, oh, well, this 3 hours in the day is actually, I don't need to do anything. I don't have any work to do, or I can't get help, because it's easier to do that, right? It can be more scary to ask your teacher for help or jump on a Zoom call. But I think parents being able to reinstate those expectations and push that kind of executive functioning skills can be really, really powerful.
That totally makes sense. And like with what like parents can do, it kind of brings me back to the circle of communal learning. And it really makes me think about how kids are accessing mentorship right now. And so when I think about organizations like the Hustlers Guild and how they're bringing STEM to children, I'm just wondering, like, during the pandemic, with everything that's going on, how are kids still receiving like tutoring? How can we make sure our kids are, getting connected with mentors? And I'm wondering if you could chime in on that, Yasmin.
Sure. So throughout the pandemic, we held college sessions as well as middle school and high school sessions for our students. We found that a lot of the students, we started at 25 and ended up with over 140 students on our session calls. But we found out with our students is that they felt that a lot of times that people weren't getting them the information that they actually needed, right? So we have a ton of kids out here that are like bored, they need stuff to do, they want stuff to do, but they feel like the people that are responsible for delivering that information to them are not necessarily hitting the marks. So there are a ton of organizations out here, first responders within the pandemic, who are actually supplying support, whether it's mentors. It's actually really easy right now to get mentors to do a lot of stuff because people have the flexibility that they don't have to leave their home and do things in person. But I also think that parents and educators, it needs to be like everyone needs to be one band, one sound, and understanding everything that's going on. So I do believe that teachers are held with a huge responsibility always on their shoulders, that parents want a certain amount of time with their child. And then you have some teachers that have 75 children that they need to give all this one-on-one time with. But then teachers understand that every one of their students don't have ideal environments, right? So you got to kind of set the standard. As parents need to understand, like, what does this playing field now look like for their teacher? Even if they are going to be teaching a few hours a day, like, what does the scheduling look like? Open houses are about to start. So a lot of parents need to be getting on these Zoom calls that these organizations and educators are sending out, and really putting their foot down, like, hey, this may not work for me. In the ideal world that you put together, it's cool, but can we get a little bit more flexibility over here? So I don't think it needs to be all on one person. It shouldn't be on the educators, the organizations, or the students, no one. It needs to be a collective pack together. And I don't think everyone should point the finger at the next person, but to start this out, it needs to be understanding. And the access and the resources are everywhere right now, but how can we get the appropriate resources to the appropriate people? Right now, HG is an intervention organization. So when the teachers can't get it together, the principal can't get a grip of the kids, we come in as an intervention to get them to the mark that they need to be at. And we've been bumping program the entire time, which is crazy because we picked up 32 sessions with DC government to make sure that the kids are getting the information. So the kids want to join. We have perfect attendance. So that's not the thing. It's just like, how do you get them the information that they actually need? And making sure that you are actually talking to the organizations, like you're giving your information to the schools. The schools, are you doing the job? Like, I sent the email, ain't gonna cut it. Especially someone ain't got Wi-Fi, ain't got a phone, like, hello, like, get it together. Like, what other means of communication can you use if that's the actual thing of getting them these resources?
That is a really good question. And I actually wanted to kind of direct that at Mrs. Angelle because I know she's a part of Jack and Jill, and they really strive to highlight mentorship. So a lot of parents, I want a mentor for my kids, but they don't know where to access a mentor, where to access a tutor. So like, how do parents get in touch with organizations like that so that they could get that mentorship for their child?
Well, and a lot of times, this is where, your counselor comes into play on the school level, because the counselors are the ones who receive the information and they put the information out there. So a lot of times, as Yasmin says, and your organization sounds phenomenal. Like, the things that you are doing in those schools is very commendable. And that's where that equity comes in at, because, not every school district has a program like that, or if there is a program like that in the school districts, then they're targeted more toward the low socioeconomic class of students or schools. And so if your school is not in one of those areas or classified as low socioeconomic status, then sometimes, you won't reap the benefits of some of those programs. I know there's many programs in my school district where we have them at other schools, but not necessarily at my school. So there is definitely disproportion because is not accessible to all schools. So therefore, sometimes the information on how to join sometimes will come through word of mouth. Sometimes different organizations will approach the school board to see what schools they can perhaps visit and recommend their services to. But as I said, a lot of times all schools won't have the chance to benefit from some of these programs. With Jack and Jill, I'm very new to that program, so I'm still learning the ins and outs. I just recently joined a couple of months ago, and right now we've had a lot of virtual programming. So we're going to be setting up some things this upcoming year, and so I'll have more information on that, of course. But a lot of times is the counselor has information, and there's a lot of programs out there, but sometimes, you know, we don't per se qualify for the programs.
Okay, thank you so much. And I was a little bit curious about homeschooling and co-ops. I heard like there's already like partnerships in place with a lot of like homeschooling networks to help like mentorship through co-ops. So I was hoping that Ms. Ward could give us a little bit of an insight on what that looks like.
So for homeschool families, a lot of the times the first question that we get is about social interaction. And that was probably one of the main things we mitigated before we decided to actually homeschool our children. So you have co-ops, but the co-ops do more than just meet up so that our children can be around each other. They actually reach out to local businesses and organizations and things like that. So like, at least in my area where I live in Virginia, there are certain days that you can't go to certain places because you can only enter because your children are homeschooled. So we have like a bunch of different things in place. And honestly, just getting a network of people who homeschool, they're going to give you the resources because they know how hard it is. I've never had an issue with homeschooling because it's like they'll volunteer. If they know you're homeschooling, I've had people say, look, I homeschooled my kids for, you know, this 5 kids. This is all the stuff I have. Do you want it? Or this is what I did. This is my letter of intent. They were, you know, texting you, reminding you to send your paperwork in on time. Like, it's a very communal thing. They just like gravitate toward you. They're going to mentor you whether you ask them to or not. Like, if they have a group, there's one group around here called Wild and Free. If they're doing an outing in a place where you can properly social distance, they will invite you. They'll like, you get invited to stuff really easily. It's like being in a club, you know, and you don't really have to do anything. It's not even somewhere that you end up reaching out to because they're going to find you. And I mean, other people are what makes this so easy for me. But joining a co-op would be the first thing if you don't have people that you know personally who homeschool. But I really didn't even have to do that. They just came to me. It was so easy.
So to piggyback on that question, where can people find these groups, these co-ops? Like, where do you look to become a part of that? And that's kind of also the same with like finding the Facebook groups, because a lot of people just don't know where to start. Like, yeah, you can do a Google search, but like it gets deeper than that. Can you explain that?
So in Virginia, we have a website called heave.org. Even if you don't live in Virginia, it's pretty beneficial. It has a bunch of templates and things like that, but it's heav.org. That is probably the first place that I would direct anyone to. And then you go on and you decide like what methods you're going to use or whatever, but they give you links to outside entities that homeschool that are popular in your area and things like that, whatever templates you need, the types of or styles of learning that you may choose to do. Some people do virtual learning, like Time for Learning is really popular. But for me, I'm one of the ones that creates my own curriculum. So then they tell you like what the rules are to that, and, you know, just whatever direction you want to go in, that's a really good starting point for anyone in our state or not. And I'm sure every state has one, but some states you have to ask permission, whereas others you just declare your intent. So you'd have to check that too.
Thank you so much. So that was heave.org, HEAV.org, for anybody who is looking to go homeschool their children full-time but want to find that community. So, I mean, I know we touched on a whole lot today. I hope all of this was helpful to everyone. I wanted everyone to be able to kind of give us their last thoughts on things that parents can do to help their kids through this tough school years. I know like everything new is tough. Everything is new. Everything is tough. So if we could start with Dr. Bryan, if you could just give us kind of your last rundown, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, sure. For me, we look at some of the topics we had discussed today, and I wanted to make sure that, I addressed learning our history. And for that topic, I wanted to say, start with your family. If you really want your child or our students to learn about our history, start with your family. Knowledge itself is so important. It's important to one's growth and development overall. How can you expect a child to have an interest in learning about Africa or African American history when they don't even know anything about their family history? This goes to the students being able to see themselves within the process. If a student grows up knowing that his or her grandfather owned an auto shop, or that their grandmother owned a beauty salon, what do you think that does to the mind of a child? It can potentially give them a sense of pride, but it can also give them purpose. And many will say, what about, the students who don't have a positive example in their family? But I'm like, no, I challenge that by saying everyone has, from whatever background, has at least one person that has accomplished something great. You have to find it. You have to praise it. I'm from Oak City, North Carolina. I know many of y'all may not know where that is. It's from the country. And as a 28-year-old male, I found out that, my great-grandfather was a college grad. He served in the military. He's a landowner. He was a farmer. He had a green thumb. I didn't grow up with this knowledge, and even hearing it at that age, it reassured me of my journey, my purpose, and it just really set me on track mentally. So as a culture, we have to start, glorifying the things that, really put value within our lives and within our culture, and stop glorifying the things that take away from our culture. And that's just the first step. We really can't rely on schools to do that. I've witnessed other cultures have after school programs that are dedicated to teaching about their culture specifically. So as community leaders, as creators, entrepreneurs, innovators, we have to continue to band together. And like, the other panelists up here have said repeatedly, this is the time for Black people to come together and make something happen. We have the power now to invoke the change and be the change that we want to see. So we got to utilize that momentum, and we have to really get active, get out here and be that example.
I would like to add to what Dr. Bryan said. This is probably the first time in 400 years where Black people have actually been well rested. And, with that rest, because you get the clarity of thought, and you get to decide what you want your norm to look like. And I really do like the part about knowing who you are, because, we're in a very interesting situation where we're learning everybody's history but our own. And to start with something that you can actually personalize is a big deal. I know for me, every generation of my family has a family member that is the history keeper. I'm that from my generation. And since my children are our fifth generation, they kind of have no choice but to be that. But we've got children who don't even know who their grandparents are. And strategically, it has been done to us to where we wouldn't know, but we're going to have to trace back as far as we can so that we can get an understanding, because it does feel good to know that your family was a landowner, or that, other parts of history that they don't tell you. Slavery was a social construct, and it wasn't always a black-white thing. So for me, when I looked my family up, I looked at slave ledgers to see if I could find them, and found out that some of them owned them. And that's something that you don't hear often. I think I've only heard that in one movie before. And it's like, you have to learn who you are and what land you had and what was stolen from you and all that, so you can figure out how you're going to take back your reparations, because no one is going to hand us anything. This is a time where we have to decide how we're going to get those by force. And it doesn't have to be a violent thing, but it can be some technological revolution. We are the most innovative, trend-setting people on this planet. Everything comes from us. So we have to start reclaiming our places now that we've got clearer minds. And I know that making it a little bit easier for my children to go through their process with education and acquiring knowledge, I always try to remind them that they are remembering and not learning, and that we're living in the past, present, and future at the same time. And with that knowledge, it's not so intimidating to go back and get what you already know. You just feel like, hey, I've done this before. I know I can get there. I'm not going to stress along the way. And that's been really helpful to us because my kids have just been knocking it all out. And I think that one of the things that really frustrated me when the pandemic happened and we realized that this was very serious and that it was going to be life altering was people were coming to me like, oh, you should charge people for this and charge people for that because you know how to do this thing. And I feel like the people who need what I have the most are probably the ones who wouldn't be able to get it. So we have to decide, you know, there are some powerful minds on this call, and it's going to be up to people like us to say, you know what, this is going to be my investment into the future of our people. So how are we going to do this to make sure that everybody has access? Like Yasmin, like what she's doing, it's just like, it blows my mind that she has all those things in place already. And we're going to be leaning on people like her. We're going to be leaning on those organizations. But what is the one small thing that we can do or I can do? Like when I start back teaching, like I've been writing all summer, because when I start back teaching, I'm just going live every day. If you want to join in and figure out what me and my kids are learning, hop on. It's going to be on there. I'm not letting it go away after 24 hours or anything like that. If you want to get on there, get on there. Don't criticize what I'm teaching, because this is what works for me and my kids. But if you want to know, I'm not going to keep it from you. If you're interested, I'm letting those with ears to hear it. If I have a book or something like that, I'm giving it away, whatever, because the people who need it most look like me. And I don't want our people to struggle anymore. Like, we're done with that. Part of what our new normal is going to look like for me is what I can do to make this easier for everybody else. So when I start teaching, I don't care if it's a kit that I'm using, whatever, like I'm going to be looking at the names. These are people that we know, like I'm going to give them what I have if I have it.
Thank you so much. And Miss Angelle, your last thoughts?
Let me just say, well said to the two previous speakers. I totally agree. My last thoughts are to collaborate. Parents, teachers, students, everyone, collaborate. Collaborate with your friends, collaborate with your church members, your co-workers, your family. Lean on those people, because a lot of times, you know, as they say, it takes a village. And right now we are the village. We need the village. We need to depend and rely on other people to help us. So my last thoughts are to collaborate.
Thank you so much. I truly believe in that collaborative effort. And Mr. Whalen, if you could give us your last thoughts.
Absolutely. I think just hearing the amazing things that the colleagues on the call are speaking about makes me just, I hope that this moment in time allows our community to see the injustices that have been happening that are not new. I think about just the reality that there's about a 500 student to 1 ratio of counselors, right? So for every 1 counselor, there's about 500 students in our communities, and that becomes drastically increased. However, there's about 1.6 million like armed officers in our schools. So like, what is the balance, or in terms of, 1.6 million students with armed officers in their schools. What does that mean for the way that we're treating our kids and the way that we're programming them to feel like they need to be controlled, and or what does their mind mean? And so when I hear like Ms. Ward speaking about, you know, we're well rested, I'm like, what does that mean for our kids who are not well rested in our Black and brown communities who have always had that kind of fear in school? And I think that often we don't talk about the way that school and fear have been brought together because of some of those systems of injustice. And what does that mean for our ability to learn? And so I just hope that this moment in time allows us to figure out, what does that safety and rest look like for our kids, so that they can focus their mental energy on learning and not trauma. And I think that's a huge piece of the puzzle that I think we're able to see clearly, hopefully clearly enough to make some real change. I would just say, in terms of our parents doing just a beautiful job at educating kids, I think it's amazing. And I think that for them to know that they're seen and that they're pushing is incredible. I would just always promote that parents take a learner stance, right? This is new for everyone. And just being okay with learning alongside your child and not trying to know it all, because even teachers in the classrooms don't know it all right now. The world has been insane. So giving themselves the grace to do that. And then I'll just say lastly, something I always say is like, we have to understand that at this point, the world is calling for skills over content. And so if we're focusing on rote memorization with our kids, we're training them for a society that is no longer going to serve them. We're also training them for jobs that we think that they can do better than, right? Like the idea of just rote memorization is something that you would do if you're just kind of like doing a, A plus B equals C job, but we're looking for entrepreneurs, we're looking for innovators, and that's skill-based. And so looking at the ability to analyze, the ability to think critically, those are things that our kids could be valued. And those are things that all of our parents are doing and know. So having kind of trust that they can do that and pushing them in that way.
Thank you so much. And absolutely last but not least, if Miss Salina could give us her final takeaways, I would really appreciate it.
For sure. Okay, I have a whole list over here. So for the parents, I want parents to be transparent and honest about what they have that's going on. I think that that's the biggest part to getting the teachers to really understand what you're up against. For the teachers, I advocate harder for the teachers because they're dealing with so many different pieces of the puzzle within, and they feel like they can't do. They're like in the middle, right? So my teachers, I say, put y'all foot on these administrators' neck. The administrators get on my nerves equally as they get on yours. No shade to any administrators on the phone, but I see what the teachers have to deal with on the day-to-day. If your kids ain't got Wi-Fi, they don't have a phone access, they don't have laptops, let them know and keep voicing it and putting up like, I cannot do my job because I can't get to my kids. So how you want to act, administrator? And when you treat it like that, it's an actual issue. And don't be scared to really say it because these kids are really, and the families are counting on you to voice it for them. And I really hate that education has become so political, and the administrators really need to understand that you need to put whatever favors that you want to do for whoever to get these programs into school and make all these different hoops that us organizations have to go through and all this red tape and things that you cannot do. And we know that you have the power to do so. I'm putting heat on administrators and the principals too, because I really don't appreciate like how they go about it. Like these kids are without so much in a pandemic, and they were out so much before the pandemic even hit. So I'm really holding y'all to the fire now because now the dent has increased and it's ridiculous. So as Nipsey said, we are not the cause, we are the effect. And people really need to understand that the pandemic is here and we need to really guide our kids through this. No one really knows. There needs to be grace. There needs to be transparency. And we really need to give our parents a break to what they're up against and our teachers too. But the community leaders really need to step up and get it together. That's all I have to say.
I appreciate your final points. And I just want to personally thank everyone here on this panel because the information that you gave us today, invaluable. Like, you may not know it, but you've touched someone today and you probably changed the outcome of someone's life because of the tips and tricks that you guys have been able to share. So thank you so much for just taking this time out to chit chat with us. I do want to give a special thanks to VIPLA for partnering with us and putting this all together. And I definitely have to thank my colleagues, Dr. Erica Waller, she's the Executive Director of More Than a Protest, and also Kamani Anthony, who is the Creative Director of More Than a Protest. I myself was the Public Relations Director. So we've all been working tirelessly to bring this to you. Thank you so much for watching once again, and we'll see you next Strategy Sunday.